in this pandemic, dealing with COVID-19, can any of these health benefits that you described from infrared radiation benefit us with regard to COVID-19?
So MedCram viewers will know that back in May of 2020, we talked about oxidative stress associated with COVID-19 infection. And we said at the time that angiotensin 2, or AT2, which is a pro-oxidant, is converted to angiotensin 1,7, which is an antioxidant, by the ACE2 enzyme, which is also a receptor. And that's the issue with SARS-CoV-2 infection. Because ACE2 is not just a receptor for the spike protein, it's also an enzyme which is keeping the oxidative stress low in the cell. As we said, angiotensin 2 is a pro-oxidant, and so it's going to lead to a lot of reactive oxygen species. However, AT17 is an antioxidant. It's going to suppress reactive oxygen species, which is good. That's what we want to do. The problem is that when the virus infects, binds to that ACE2 receptor, it knocks out that enzyme. And so instead of angiotensin 2 going down and angiotensin 1,7 going up, we have the opposite occur. And so what we have is angiotensin 2 going up, angiotensin 1,7 going down. And not only that, but the virus itself attracts white blood cells, which also has oxidative stress, as we talked about earlier. And so all of these things lead to an increased amount of reactive oxygen species. So if you think about this, going back to the analogy of the engine, imagine that you're...
And not sure, but lisinopril increases ACE expression, which would then open the doorway for the spike protein to bind to the ACE receptor. And I don't know, there's about 90 million prescriptions of lisinopril every year, something like that.
Your antioxidant system isn't working very well. Your cooling system is not working very well. And so as you're driving along, your engine is running a little hot, which is not good. And then all of a sudden what happens is you hit this hill, which is called COVID-19. And as you're going up the hill, that's enough to cause your engine to fall over just the edge, where now it's overheating, steam is coming out of the engine, and you're pulling over to the side of the road. That's the issue with COVID-19. It's taking patients who have high oxidative stress levels already because they're not optimized, and it's causing them to go over the edge. So we've talked about this. This is why patients are coming into the hospital, because this reactive oxygen species are damaging the endothelial cells, which line the blood vessels. That causes microclots to occur. That leads to hypoxemia and increased oxygen levels. The solution, of course, is having melatonin to cool down that engine. Melatonin that comes intravenously from the pipe.
So the spike protein from the injections from the COVID vaccines, the pathogenic component of the virus, does the same thing. I mean, that's what does it. It causes the endothelial nicking and the microclots, which were so integral in destroying the organs of so many people, causing heart attacks, strokes, etc. So, boo.
Pineal gland and goes into the cells to reduce the oxidative stress. Melatonin, which is coming from the sun through near infrared radiation. If you're getting these things, you're actually benefiting.
Which I just want to point out that I started talking about in March of 2020, and the absolute importance of melatonin, and that kids have like 9 times the melatonin than adults.
And you're less likely to run into the consequences of COVID-19. Here's a paper, Kyle, that was published last month. 60 patients admitted to the hospital, and they measured the levels of glutathione, which is an antioxidant in the cell. They looked at TBARS, which is basically a measure of oxidative stress. And they also looked at something called F2 isoprostane, which is a marker of oxidative damage. And this is really interesting. I want to make sure that people understand this. So here we're looking at intracellular reduced glutathione.
I was also told by the head of pulmonology at OHSU that antioxidants have no role in COVID, and that acetylcysteine and glutathione have no benefit and no role in people with COVID.
This is an antioxidant. First of all, I want you to note.
And was made fun of by the Assistant Attorney General for sharing information with the Commission about the importance of glutathione, and that endogenous glutathione was found to be one of the main contributors to severe COVID infection and or death.
That in the control subjects, which are in blue, that as we get older, here's the 21 to 40, the 41 to 60, and the 60 year plus, notice that these levels are going down. So that's important to understand, that as you get older, your antioxidant system gets worse. Kind of like a car, right? As the car gets older, it's more likely to overheat. But notice that in the COVID patients, there was a significant drop, especially in the younger, there was a significant drop in the measure of intracellular antioxidants. Now remember, what is it that regulates glutathione? We already said it. It's melatonin. Melatonin is the product that increases glutathione inside the cell. So when we looked at oxidative stress, and that's plasma, TBARS, Notice the same thing. As we go older in the control groups, the amount of oxidative stress went up, but even more so with those in the COVID group. So again, increased oxidative stress with COVID-19 infection. Finally, when we look at the measurements of damage with F2 isoprostane, we're seeing here consistently across the board, regardless of the age group, that COVID patients had higher levels of oxidative damage. It's very clear, if you look at the data, this is not controversial in any way, shape, or form, that we have seen over and over again, that people with high vitamin...
Hold on. It's not controversial in any way, shape, or form? Then why is it that it was one of the primary things that the Washington Medical Commission and the hospitals, et cetera, were going after me for when I was making statements to my community? Why did they absolutely crush me, if you will, for talking about this?
D levels, as you can see here in this study of 185 patients, people with high vitamin D levels or higher vitamin D levels had better survival probability in COVID-19. And those with low vitamin D levels had lower survival. We thought that maybe because vitamin D levels were higher in those people that survived, that by giving vitamin D, we could actually improve their outcomes. And for sure, in some studies, there has been a modest improvement in survival when we gave vitamin D to patients who were in the hospital or even before. And there's many studies that show that chronic vitamin D supplementation can help reduce some of these acute chest infections. But what I'm believing more and more now, Kyle, is that vitamin D, yes, can be used, but it's also a marker of sunlight exposure and therefore infrared radiation. And so it's possible that by seeing high vitamin D levels, we're seeing the effects of infrared radiation at the mitochondrial level and the antioxidant level. I'm beginning to understand that it may be a mistake to think, in other words, that if you have your vitamin D supplementation, that you don't need to go outside and get infrared radiation. I think that would be a mistake if we thought that. And one of the reasons why I believe that more and more now is because of this study, which was published in the British Journal of Dermatology, and it was conducted by researchers at the University of Edinburgh. And what they basically did was they looked at the United States and they cut out the portion of the United States during last winter, in the winter of 2020, where there would be enough vitamin D production if you went out into the sun. So they cut that portion out. They only looked at the portion of the United States where there wasn't enough sunlight to make any significant vitamin D. And even in that portion, so this portion up here, they were able to show that increasing levels of sunlight led to decreasing COVID-19 mortality. When they figured that out, they went ahead and prospectively applied it to the country of England and also to the country of Italy. And they found very similar results, that as sunshine levels went up further in the south, they found that mortality levels went down. Same thing here in Italy. So what they've decided was that something was in the sunlight other than vitamin D that was causing a decrease in mortality. In conclusion, this study is observational, and therefore any causal interpretation needs to be taken with caution. Granted, there's other factors that could have played into this. However, they say, if the relationship identified proves to be causal, it suggests that optimizing sun exposure may be a possible public health intervention, given that the effect appears to be completely independent of a vitamin D pathway. It suggests possible new COVID-19 therapies. Now, I wanted to show you that this idea of exposing people to sunlight when they're sick is not a new idea. I was able to go back and
Are you going to talk about Ellen G. White?
research what people thought about sunlight, and many of you in our audience will understand and know that for many years tuberculosis was treated with sunlight exposure. Here you can see in this first picture on the left in the UK, there are young patients here that are outside getting sun exposure, and they're here for orthopedic physical conditions. We can see here in this nice hospital that they've actually purposefully built beds outside the hospital so patients could get sun exposure.
Wait a minute. They didn't completely isolate them and shun them from society?
Here's another photograph on the right-hand side where there's a area in the building specifically for people to come out and get sun exposure. You know, people were very observant 100 years ago. They understood and they saw things that happened. They may not have understood why they happened. I think we're starting to understand that now. But as I researched this more and more and I started to look through the literature, I found some very interesting statements that I wanted to share with you. These quotes were from a notable woman health reformer from the 1800s. She wrote, "The feeble one should press out into the sunshine as earnestly and naturally as do the shaded plants and vines. The pale and sickly grain blade that has struggled up out of the cold of early spring puts out the natural and healthy deep green after enjoying for a few days the health and life-giving rays of the sun. Go out into the light and warmth." Notice she says warmth here, which is exactly what we're talking about in terms of infrared radiation. "Go out into the light and warmth of the glorious sun, you pale and sickly ones, and share with its vegetation its life-giving, health-dealing power." That was from a health reformer back in 1871. She also wrote, interestingly, because we talked about when it's daylight, you need to go out into the sun. Well, what do you do at night? She writes, "Make it a habit not to sit up after 9 o'clock. Every light should be extinguished. This turning night into day is a wretched, health-destroying habit." You know, I'm comparing what happened back then in the...
It's interesting. So, that's part of the Seventh-day Adventist health message, and what Loma Linda University was kind of founded on. They have apparently now rejected all of that truth, but you know, COVID.
1800s to what is happening now. Here's a near-infrared photograph, for instance, of a summer day in a wheat field. You can see that there is tremendous reflectance of near-infrared, as you can see by the white of the leaves and the wheat field. And this is a little bit hyperbolic here, but on the right-hand side, this is a near-infrared photograph, potentially, of our homes, schools, and offices. Why is that? Because the new bulbs that we put in our offices have no, really, to speak of any infrared light. We have new types of glass called low-E glass, which are designed to block near-infrared radiation from coming into the building because it's energy efficient. Our LED bulbs are energy efficient. And so we're not getting the same type of near-infrared radiation that we were once getting before. And as Kyle mentioned at the top of this program, we're spending 93% of our lives
I forget he teaches at Loma Linda.
not outside, but rather inside something. If we look at this graph, we can see here that back in the 1800s, 50% of the time we spent outdoors. We sat in front of campfires, which gives off, of course, infrared radiation. And this was the amount of visible light that we were getting at the time. And this is the amount of near-infrared light, it's estimated. Back by 1950, we had 100% incandescent light bulbs, and we had plain glass windows, and we spent about 25% instead of 50% of our time outdoors. Still, much more near-infrared than visible light. By 1990, we had switched to 50% fluorescent bulbs and 50% incandescent. We still had the plain glass windows, but we only spent about 15% of the time outdoors. So there was a reduction in both of those areas. But today, we are basically using bulbs that are only 100% in the visual spectrum. There's no infrared radiation. We're using LEDs, OLEDs, CFLs. We have this low E glass, which is specifically designed to block infrared radiation. And we're only spending, as Kyle mentioned at the beginning, 7% of the time outdoors. And this is really specific to developed countries. This is not seen in undeveloped countries. They're still spending plenty of time outdoors. We, on the other hand, are indoors. Here's a graph looking at LED lights. So LED lights would be this red graph. You can see here that once it hits near infrared, there's literally no near infrared whatsoever coming from that bulb. In the solar spectrum, when you go outside, you can see that a vast majority of the energy coming from the sun is in the near infrared spectrum. You can't see it, but it's there. An incandescent light bulb here in blue, you can see that there is a significant amount of near infrared radiation coming from a regular light bulb that we used to have in our homes 10 or 20 years ago. So we can see that there is a shift in that direction. Let's talk a little bit more about low E glass. So you can see here, a regular glass here, we're looking at the visible spectrum up here, and we're looking at infrared